Greetings and welcome to Luca Sprues. This video is a little bit special because I wanted to celebrate the first commercial flight of the new airline that has recently set up in my backyard, Bonza. So, I did what anyone else would do in the situation and rushed to the local hobby store and grabbed myself a Zevezda 1:144 scale Boeing 737-8Max and some custom decal paper and set to work. Just a slight disclaimer, this is actually the first time I've ever built a commercial jet as a model kit. More than happy to receive any feedback and tips in the comments, but let's get into it. I began by assembling the wing and wheel well bays by cutting them off the sprue and gluing them together using Revell Contactor Professional and some Bulldog clips to hold them in place while the glue bonded them. They fitted easily together, so I then moved on to the fuselage halves. The clear parts for the windows had to be placed before the fuselage halves were glued together, so I began by cutting them out and dry fitting them to get the window sections correct before using a wooden skewer to apply them with some super glue. The Bulldog clips were once again used to keep the windows in place. I then attached the nose wheel well bay and moved on to adding some backing for the windows. I printed off some pictures of windows for both the cabin and also the cockpit, and then used PVA glue to apply them to the clear parts on the kit. I think the results were mixed, looking a little bit better on the cockpit but not so much on the cabin. I would definitely love to hear anyone's tips on how to do aircraft cabin windows, since they were really fiddly and I think I could have done a little bit better on this kit. Definitely want to improve in the future. After painstakingly doing the windows, I added a counterweight to the front of the aircraft so it would stay on its three wheels, and then glued the fuselage halves together and used a little bit of masking tape and some Bulldog clips to keep the halves together. Overall, the fit of this kit was really good in just about every aspect. Zevezda did a really good job with this one. I joined the wing halves after adding on the winglets and the APU and rudder to the fuselage before moving on to assembling the landing gear. This was probably one of the second most fiddly parts after doing the windows, but the landing gear details were really good and the fit was pretty good as well. I attached the landing gear struts and then added the flap fairings onto the wings before moving on to assembling the giant CFM LEAP engines. Assembling and painting the engine was probably my favourite part in this entire kit. The details are very nicely done and the fit is also superb. I began by cutting out the fan blades and then painting the compressors dark grey and using a bit of silver for the inside of the engine cowlings and the exhaust nozzles. After the first layer of paint, I cut out the nozzles and assembled them together along with the compressor blades. I used flat black to paint the inside of the main cowling section and also on the fan blades. I then used a very fine brush to apply flat aluminium on the tips of the fan blades based on reference photos I had of the 737-8Max's engine. After some final touch-ups of paint, I then finally assembled both engines. Thanks to the keying on this kit, it's pretty easy to figure out which parts go where. However, it is still a little bit fiddly due to the small size. After completing the engines, I then glued them onto the underside of the wing before adding on the front and rear fairings for the nacelles. After adding on these final parts, I then sealed the windows using a little bit of Humbrol Maskol. I hadn't used this before, and I thought it would be a good idea since it's designed to mask the clear parts and then be removed with a little bit of blue tack. I gave this a little go, and I think the results could have been a little bit better, but perhaps I need a little bit more practice. There'll be some future build videos where I'll be using this stuff, hopefully. I painted 4 coats of Tamiya gloss white onto the fuselage, the tail, the engine nacelles and winglets of the model aircraft. I used a little bit of water to thin the paint so that my layers weren't too thick and gloopy, and then applied it, trying to keep in the same direction. I chose the direction of the airflow if the aircraft was moving through the air, as I usually do when painting models. I also choose the largest brush I possibly can for a surface to minimise the brush strokes. Once I'd painted the aircraft, I then removed the Humbrol Maskol. It seemed to do a very good job at masking, but I think I may not have applied it properly because it wasn't the cleanest of masks. I'll definitely have to practice a bit more in the future, but as you can see, the results are not bad. And now came the real fun, doing the decals. I designed them in GIMP and then printed them out using a LaserJet printer onto the decal paper I brought online. and then I applied them as I would with any other decals, soaking them in water and then sliding them onto the model and later applying some Tamiya decal adhesive over the top. The decals I made were alright. The detail was good, but they tended to flake a bit, possibly because I didn't use enough sealant, so I only used them for detailed shapes and the finer markings, and then painted the rest. This is the final result of the decals. Thanks to some brilliant reference photos from members of the Sunshine Coast Aero Club, I was able to get the text for Shazza, or Uniform Juliet Tango, so that's the scheme I ended up doing. I'm pretty happy with the results for the decals for a first go. I then moved on to painting the finer details that I'd missed out with the decals. I used some Tamiya purple on the engine nacelles and also on the tail section. Based on reference photos, Shazza's winglets were left plain white, so I decided to just leave them like that, even though later on they might end up getting painted purple. I ended up later reprinting the thumbs and applying them separately, since originally I was hoping to have the entire rear section of the purple as a decal, but decided because of how flaky they were to just have the thumb, the registration, and the doors. While the thumbs dried, I painted some of the finer details on the landing gear, such as the tyres, using flat black. I then also painted the leading edge of the wing and the horizontal stabilizers, and the front section fairing of the cowling using flat aluminium and a very fine brush and steady hand. I also added the last of the purple for the rear section of the aircraft. I ended up doing about 3 layers of purple for each section, and then I neatened it up at the very end. The wings and horizontal stabilizer were painted 3 coats of royal light grey using the same technique I used on the fuselage. I then also neatened up the landing gear using some flat white. It was at this point that my cat decided to get involved in matters, and you can see him running through very briefly round about now. I painted the underside of the wing also in royal light grey, and then painted the inside of the wheel wells in flat earth. After painting the last coat of royal light grey, I then glued the horizontal stabilizers onto the rear of the aircraft and moved on to adding the lights. I used Tamiya Clear Red for the beacon lights and the nav lights, as well as Tamiya Clear Green for the other nav light, which added a tiny bit of extra detail. I created a little bit of weathering and burnt kind of effects using some flat black watered down heavily. I applied it to the landing gear for hydraulic fluids, onto the nozzles of the air intake where they'd be burned, and on the underside of the wings and upper side as well, to create streaking effects. I rubbed it off a little bit so that it would fall into the seams and joints, which made it look a little bit like hydraulic leaks had occurred, or just grime and dust had built up over time. This was just a nice little subtle effect and also helped bring out the details a little bit more and add just a tiny bit of realism. You'll also notice that I try and make it look like the weathering has streaked over the wing as the aircraft has flown through the air. The final step in this model was to add the common decals that were provided in the kit for things such as the markings for the emergency exits, the walkways, the engines, and also the frame around the cockpit, and with that, my model was finally completed. I was fortunate enough to be able to get some photos of my small model next to the real Bonza planes parked out at the Sunshine Coast Airport, which I found to be really awesome. This model is far from perfect, but overall I'm super excited with how it turned out, being my first jet and a bit of an experimental with custom decals. However, I really love the Bonza scheme, and the kit is brilliant with great details and it goes together really well, so I highly recommend it. I look forward to doing some more Australian airline kits in the future, including a Jetstar Airbus A320 I have in the works. And I wish Bonza all the best as they start to prepare to make their mark in Australian aviation legend, and I hope to fly with them soon. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to leave a like, and fire away any questions or feedback you have for me in the comments section below. A special shout out to my amazing patrons, Archie Palmer, Emo, Joan Moss, and also K&J Jones for helping fund this model kit. Thanks again for watching, and until the next time, model on!